At exactly 5:32 in the morning, the sound that shattered the quiet wasn't birds or wind, but the roar of a chainsaw slicing through a living, breathing tree. I jolted up from bed thinking a storm had hit, only to find that the real disaster was standing in my orchard in leopard print yoga pants, sunglasses, and a smug expression. Karen Merriweather, the HOA president and unofficial queen of our neighborhood, was standing beside a hired crew who were already halfway through their fifth tree, all under the glow of portable floodlights like this was some pre-dawn lumberjack Olympics. She took a sip from her oversized Starbucks cup and shouted, "Make sure you get that twisted one too. It's been leaning like it owns the place." I stood there frozen in my pajamas, staring at 6 years of federal research being turned into mulch because a woman with an Excel spreadsheet thought my orchard looked unkempt. My life's work was disappearing before my eyes, and the woman responsible was treating it like a weekend landscaping project. I don't remember putting on shoes. I just remember sprinting across the field barefoot, shouting louder than I ever had in my life. The chainsaws didn't even pause. One of the landscapers looked up, nodded at Karen, and kept going. I shouted again, waving my arms. Finally, someone hit the kill switch on the closest saw. The silence was deafening. Karen turned to me with a look of mock surprise, like I had just rudely interrupted her dinner party. "Jackson, darling, calm down. We're improving the view. This is affecting property values. You should thank me." I blinked, my chest heaving. I didn't know whether to scream or throw up. "Those are protected research trees. You just committed a federal offense, Karen." Karen blinked, tilted her head, and actually laughed. "Oh, please. I Googled your little orchard. It's just fruit trees. You can replant them." The absurdity of the moment knocked the breath out of me, not because of what she said, but because of what she didn't understand. These weren't just fruit trees. They were hybrid saplings designed through years of experimentation to resist drought, soil disease, and frostbite. I was part of a classified Department of Agriculture initiative operating under an NDA so tight I couldn't even tell my own neighbors what I was doing. Except Karen didn't care about facts. She cared about fence color coordination and how many inches of grass were legally acceptable. And now she had destroyed part of a $3 million U.S. pilot program in less time than it takes to toast a bagel. The chainsaws revved again, as if eager to finish their destructive symphony before the neighborhood fully woke. I ran back into the house and grabbed the binder. Not just any binder, the one with USDA clearance forms, my contractor badge, my soil sample authorizations, and the laminated tag index for every tree planted. I returned to the site waving it like a flag. "These are federally coded. Each tree is logged with satellite monitoring. You destroyed tagged property under government protection." Karen sauntered over like she was on a runway and actually grabbed the binder from my hand. She flipped it open, glanced at a page, scoffed, and dropped it in the mud. "Honestly, Jackson, if you're going to fake documents, at least use real paper, not this glossy stuff. It looks like you printed it from Pinterest." Then she turned to the crew and said, "Keep going, boys. Let's wrap this up before brunch." I stood there paralyzed as another tree screamed its last breath under the chainsaw. I didn't know if I should call the police or the president. What made it worse was the neighbors who had come out in robes and slippers, watching like it was a reality show. One guy, Dr. Ramirez, even brought popcorn. No one intervened. No one questioned her. She had ruled the HOA for so long, people treated her like royalty. They feared her fines, her passive-aggressive emails, and worst of all, her ability to gossip something into reality. I apparently was now the community nut who kept government trees, like a lunatic botanist with tinfoil on the windows. In one final attempt, I pointed to the yellow leaf tag still hanging from the trunk of a tree they hadn't reached yet. "Look, it's a federal tag. You can't just remove those." Karen raised an eyebrow, walked over, and yanked it off with a theatrical flourish. "See? Removed." She waved it like a trophy. "What are they going to do, send in fruit police?" The landscapers chuckled. I didn't, because that tag had a GPS tracker embedded, one that would soon trigger a silent alarm at the regional USDA office the moment it went offline. and that alarm had a classification protocol called Code Green. What she didn't realize was that every tag contained a microchip that would soon unleash a storm she couldn't control with her HOA rulebook. Karen didn't know it, but she had just declared war on the United States Department of Agriculture. And as funny as that sounds, USDA doesn't take kindly to sabotage, especially when it costs them half a decade of research. I picked up my binder, wiped the mud off with my sleeve, and walked back inside. My hands were shaking as I opened the secure app and pressed the red button I never thought I'd need. It sent an encrypted alert straight to my supervisor's satellite phone. I didn't even have to type anything. The system read my coordinates, accessed the drone feeds, and automatically flagged it as an active contamination or sabotage event. Outside, Karen posed for a selfie next to the pile of sawdust, beaming like she just saved the neighborhood from an alien invasion. "This will go great on the HOA newsletter," she chirped. "Jackson, try not to be such a drama queen. It's just landscaping." She had no idea that within 12 hours, federal agents in black SUVs would be knocking on her door. No idea that every camera on my property linked directly to the USDA surveillance network had been recording her every word. And no idea that the so-called ugly trees she just massacred were part of an international seed-sharing initiative with researchers in drought-ravaged regions of Africa and Asia. She thought she was cleaning up. What she was really doing was digging her own legal grave with a chainsaw. As I stood by the window watching her sip her latte while the crew packed up the remaining stumps, I whispered the same phrase my supervisor, Dr. Walsh, once told me when I first joined the program. Never underestimate how fast someone can go from HOA president to federal defendant. Karen just started the stopwatch. The moment I pressed that red button on the USDA app, things kicked into motion faster than I expected. Within 3 hours, a black SUV with tinted windows pulled up at the edge of my property, followed closely by another vehicle bearing federal plates. 2 men and 1 woman in dark suits stepped out, one carrying a portable drone case, the other holding what looked like a military-grade tablet. Karen was still out in her lawn chair, sipping cucumber water like she was watching over her kingdom. I could practically hear the screeching of her entitlement tires about to blow as the agents approached. They didn't even ring my doorbell. They walked directly to the orchard remains, scanned the stumps, and started analyzing the soil. One drone lifted into the air and began taking aerial snapshots. Within minutes, the damage was quantified. 17 trees destroyed, 11 tags ripped, 1 project severely compromised. Karen, of course, noticed the commotion and decided to investigate. With her oversized sunglasses and sun hat, she strutted across the grass like she was about to deliver a monologue in a soap opera. "Excuse me," she said, her voice dripping with forced politeness. "Is there a reason federal agents are sniffing around our gardens?" The lead agent, a tall man named Martinez, turned to her with the kind of professional calm that said he didn't have time for suburban melodrama. "Ma'am, this property is under investigation due to the unauthorized destruction of federally protected agricultural research materials." Karen's eyes narrowed. "I'm the HOA president. If there's an issue here, you can direct it through our legal team." She tried handing him a business card. He didn't even look at it. "You're not authorized to manage or oversee this parcel. It falls outside of HOA jurisdiction and is under temporary USDA contract. Your name has been logged as the individual who authorized the landscaping crew." Karen blinked. For a moment, I actually saw something rare in her eyes. Hesitation. But like all seasoned narcissists, she powered through it with more arrogance. "You're clearly mistaken. These were nuisance trees. I have a signed motion from the HOA board approving their removal." She pulled out a folded paper, the ink still visible from the printer's heat. Martinez didn't even touch it. Instead, the female agent, Chen, showed her a tablet screen. It had satellite tag logs, timestamps of the tags being ripped, geofencing violations, and thermal imaging of the site. The system flagged this location as compromised at 6:07 a.m. You were recorded on both drone and stationary ground footage verbally ordering the removals. Karen looked at the screen, and for the first time in probably her entire reign of HOA terror, She didn't have a comeback. The color drained from her face as she realized her kingdom was built on sand, and the tide was coming in fast. What came next was the kind of bureaucratic hammer I never thought I'd witness firsthand. The agents issued an on-site cease and desist order to Karen, which froze any landscaping activity on my land. But it didn't stop there. They also served a records request to the HOA, demanding all internal emails, approvals, landscaping contracts, and payment authorizations relating to my property. Karen sputtered something about privacy and rights, but Agent Chen simply handed her a federal subpoena request form. Refusal to comply can result in civil penalties and obstruction charges, she said, her tone flat and unreadable. Karen's jaw flapped open, closed, then opened again, like a confused puppet. Back at the HOA clubhouse, which she treated like her personal throne room, panic was setting in. The other board members who had likely rubber-stamped her landscaping requests out of fear or laziness were now trying to distance themselves like rats from a sinking ship. One of them, Wayne, a guy who never made eye contact with anyone, immediately claimed he never saw the actual papers. Another member said he was on vacation during that vote. Karen tried to rally them, declaring that they needed to present a united front against government overreach, but no one was buying it, especially when the agents requested to review security footage from the HOA building, which clearly showed Karen slipping a removal authorization under their doors without signatures. The footage showed her smirking. Things escalated when Agent Martinez confirmed that one of the herbicides sprayed during the destruction had seeped into the groundwater testing well located behind the orchard, something Karen clearly didn't even know existed. The water sensor had detected a spike in chemicals used in lawn treatment products, chemicals banned in research sites due to the potential impact on controlled samples. That meant the entire site had to be re-evaluated, and worst of all, the test zone might have to be quarantined. This wasn't just about trees anymore. This was now a potential environmental contamination issue. The agents returned to my home with new instructions. They needed to expand surveillance, secure any remaining soil data, and collect atmospheric logs from the microsensors I had installed near the back gate. They handed me a temporary immunity document that shielded me from local ordinances and HOA actions while the investigation was ongoing. It felt like being handed a shield in the middle of a battlefield. I signed it without hesitation. Meanwhile, Karen wasn't done yet. That night, she attempted damage control by sending an HOA-wide email titled "Setting the Record Straight." In it, she claimed I was exaggerating the importance of the orchard, that it was merely a hobby garden, and that the agents were doing routine inspections due to suspicious behavior. She even attached a blurry photo of my drone dock and claimed it was used to spy on the community. That's when I forwarded her email to Agent Chen, who simply replied with, "Thank you. That confirms intent to deceive." Less than an hour later, the agents returned to the clubhouse with an updated subpoena, including potential defamation. The neighborhood started whispering. Some residents were already fed up with Karen's behavior, but now her overreach was causing them real problems. One neighbor couldn't sell his house because of the pending federal investigation. Another missed a contractor appointment because the HOA clubhouse was sealed for document collection. Karen's empire was crumbling, and the pillars she thought were solid were now quicksand. I got a call the next morning from Dr. Walsh, my supervisor. He told me to remain calm, cooperate fully, and prepare for potential media coverage. "This is bigger than just your site," he said. "This could have ripple effects across multiple test zones." Karen's actions jeopardized a collaborative initiative with 6 universities. "There are going to be consequences." He paused and then added, "But also, nice job triggering the drone alarm." That feature just passed beta testing. By the end of the day, the orchard was cordoned off with bright yellow federal tape. Signs were posted along the fence line reading "Protected Research Site. Unauthorized access is a federal offense." Karen drove past it 3 times, each time slower than the last. She didn't get out of her car. She didn't wave. And for once, she wasn't smiling. Her newsletter had gone silent. Her garden parties were canceled. Her reign, once enforced with fines and Facebook posts, was now being dismantled one subpoena at a time. And all it took was one tree stump, one tag, and one woman too entitled to read a federal warning label. The neighbors who once cowered under her rule were now whispering behind their curtains, watching the fall of their suburban dictator with a mixture of awe and satisfaction. Karen's silence didn't last long. Just as the neighborhood began to enjoy a momentary hush from her HOA crusades, she resurfaced, this time armed not with fines or flyers, but with a megaphone and a media crew. At exactly noon, just as I was logging the latest USDA drone data, I heard the unmistakable sound of folding chairs being dragged across the community lawn. I looked out the window to find Karen setting up a press conference. There was a hand-painted sign that read, "Stop Government Overreach," taped to the back of a $10 podium. Someone had wheeled out a refreshment table with lemonade and cookies, and Karen stood center stage, flanked by two bewildered-looking neighbors she'd roped in as her supporters. I could only shake my head. This wasn't a woman retreating from defeat. This was someone doubling down with the kind of misplaced confidence that could only come from years of never being told no. The local news van arrived 20 minutes later. A junior reporter stepped out, probably thinking they were here to cover some neighborhood beautification project or missing cat. Instead, they were immediately ambushed by Karen, who launched into a tirade about how the federal government was using fruit trees as cover for surveillance technology. She claimed my orchard was a front for a secret drone testing facility, that her landscaping decision was a patriotic act of neighborhood protection, and that she had uncovered the real reason property taxes were going up. She ended her speech with an emphatic, "This is not just about trees. This is about tyranny." I watched from a distance as the reporter looked at the camera crew with a mix of confusion and disbelief. Before Karen could bask too long in her delusion, the story took a sharp turn. That same afternoon, a regional news outlet published a breaking story based on documents leaked from a whistleblower inside the USDA. The report outlined the exact scope of the orchard's purpose. It was part of a multi-million-dollar agricultural resilience study aimed at combating food insecurity in climate-vulnerable regions. The story included detailed maps, grant numbers, and even statements from participating university partners. But the real bombshell came in the form of security camera footage. Someone, likely one of the agents, had quietly provided a clip of Karen gleefully yanking a federal tag off a tree and mocking it on camera. That clip hit the internet like wildfire. Within an hour, the image of Karen smirking next to a stump while holding the tag like a trophy became a meme. One version captioned, "Nature's worst enemy," trended for a full day. Another read, "When evil power goes unchecked." Karen had officially lost control of the narrative. What was once an attempt to save face had now spiraled into digital infamy. Her press conference was mocked, her lemonade stand ignored, and even her supporters backed away as the footage played on repeat across local news. She tried to argue it was edited, that it was taken out of context, but the raw version had already been verified and shared by journalists. It showed her not only removing the tag but saying clearly, "What are they going to do? Send in fruit police?" followed by laughter from her hired crew. The quote became a rallying cry for my supporters online. People started tagging federal departments with #FruitPolice and demanding she be held accountable. By the next morning, the HOA board had called an emergency meeting, this time without Karen. They met in someone's backyard, out of the public eye, trying to figure out how to distance the entire association from the legal firestorm. Word got around that several board members were lawyering up, not because they had directly approved Karen's actions, but because they had been complicit through silence or inaction. The HOA insurance provider suspended coverage pending an investigation, and community funding froze. Trash collection was missed that week because the account was locked. The pool remained closed due to unpaid maintenance. Residents were furious. They started posting anonymously in local Facebook groups detailing years of Karen's abuses, everything from arbitrary fines to threats of foreclosure over mailbox colors. Karen responded by filing a countersuit. She alleged that I had misrepresented my land, that I had failed to notify the HOA of the government activity, and that the U.S. project was non-transparent and possibly illegal. She called a second press event, this time in front of her house, where she gave another rambling speech about deep garden ops and the war on community freedom. It would have been funny if it wasn't so sad. But that press event never aired. Why? Because halfway through her speech, a process server walked up and handed her an envelope live on camera. She tried to wave it away, but the server clearly stated, "You can serve on behalf of the United States Department of Agriculture and the State Environmental Commission." Her jaw locked. She stood frozen, blinking into the sunlight, papers shaking in her hands. The cameraman kept filming. The clip went viral. With her legal maneuver crushed before it even began, Karen started to unravel. She began blaming everyone around her: the board, the landscapers, the neighbors who didn't warn her, even the local nursery for selling too aggressive pruning equipment. The HOA members had had enough. A petition circulated to suspend Karen from all leadership roles. It gained 75% of neighborhood signatures in less than a day. A vote was held. She was out. Her golden parking spot at the clubhouse was painted over. Her name was removed from the website. All her pending projects were frozen, but the damage had already taken root. I received a call from the USDA legal team letting me know that not only was Karen being held liable, but the HOA itself might face collective penalties unless it cooperated fully. They offered the HOA board a conditional deal: assist in the recovery process, provide full transparency, and Karen could take the brunt of the civil penalties. It was the legal version of a lifeboat, and the board jumped on it. Karen, however, refused to go down quietly. She started plastering the neighborhood with flyers claiming she was being persecuted by botanical fascists and drone operatives. She even accused me of hacking her phone. I didn't, but the USDA did freeze her internet activity as part of an ongoing cyber harassment claim. She didn't know that yet. By the end of the week, every major HOA document related to her term was under review. My orchard, meanwhile, was being restored with the help of university teams and interns. We even began introducing new saplings, genetically stronger and now tagged with more visible markers. Federal signage was posted on every fence panel. A motion-sensing camera system went up, along with a placard noting the orchard's significance in international climate research. Students from nearby colleges were invited to assist and tour the site. What was once a quiet grove now buzzed with the activity of growth and recovery. Karen still lived in the neighborhood, but she didn't show her face as often. When she did, it was usually to collect a package quickly or yell at a raccoon near her trash bin. Her power was gone, her voice now mostly confined to angry Facebook comments where she was routinely ignored or laughed off. The woman who had once controlled the look of every mailbox and the exact shade of seasonal wreaths had become a neighborhood cautionary tale. Like the trees she tried to destroy, justice had deep roots, and they had finally broken through the concrete of her HOA tyranny. Spring brought a change in the air, not just in weather, but in energy. The once quiet and dismissed orchard space was now a buzzing hub of activity and purpose. After weeks of coordination between USDA, local universities, and agricultural tech developers, the orchard was finally ready for replanting. This time there were no landscapers with chainsaws. Instead, there were scientists in field gear, students in gloves and lab coats, and government officials in polos with clipboards. The entire operation was supervised like a space launch. Every seed, every root, every drip of water was measured, tracked, logged. Where once there was chaos and ego-driven destruction, now stood a unified mission of restoration, knowledge, and a touch of poetic justice. I stood near the front fence watching the new saplings being planted with surgical precision when Agent Chen approached with a smirk and a tablet. "You'll like this," she said, handing it to me. I read the screen and immediately burst out laughing. USDA, in partnership with the Agricultural Development Board, had approved the naming of a new hybrid citrus tree being tested in our orchard. It was engineered for ornamental use, largely bitter in flavor, erratic in seasonal behavior, and highly resistant to removal. They named it Corenicus Merriweather. I didn't even have to ask. Yes, Chen confirmed. It's official. We even made sure she's credited in the USDA database. Scientific legacy secured. The humor wasn't just for laughs. It was a message. Even in science, there's room for storytelling. Word of the naming spread quickly. It became an inside joke within academic circles and even made its way into a late-night TV segment where a comedian read off absurd plant names and landed on Copernicus Merriweather, calling it the tree version of a restraining order. Memes surged again. The community, which had tiptoed around Karen for years, was now openly enjoying her downfall. Lawn signs popped up with slogans like "Plant trees, not tyranny," and "Orchard overlords greater than HOA overlords." For the first time in a long time, neighbors started talking freely, laughing in driveways, and even planning potlucks again without fear of HOA surveillance or Karen's sudden dramatic pop-ins. But for Karen herself, things were only getting worse. After her removal from the board and the USDA lawsuit gained national attention, the financial reality hit her hard. The HOA's frozen funds meant pending maintenance, landscaping refunds, and trash contracts couldn't be processed. Since she was still technically a resident, Karen had to live in the results of her own administrative wreckage. The community pool turned green from lack of chemical upkeep. Street lights flickered because nobody could approve the repairs. A local newspaper ran a story titled, "From President to Pest: The Fall of Karen Merriweather." In that article, a former HOA treasurer anonymously admitted that Karen had always run things like a petty dictatorship, and no one wanted to challenge her because she was relentless and vindictive. But now people wanted accountability, and they wanted it in writing. I received dozens of anonymous letters and thank you notes in my mailbox from neighbors who had once avoided me or whispered behind my back. Some admitted they thought I was exaggerating about the federal project. Others confessed they feared Karen would target them next if they sided with me. One note simply said, "Thank you for saving our neighborhood and making her finally shut up." It was short, but it hit home. One afternoon, I saw Karen walking along the road by herself, clutching a binder to her chest and muttering under her breath. She had no clipboard, no minions, no authority, just her and the reality of being the neighborhood pariah. She paused near the orchard fence, staring at the new trees now surrounded by sensor posts and monitoring stations. She didn't say anything, didn't yell, just stood there for a long time, then turned and walked away. Maybe she was realizing what she'd destroyed. Maybe not. But either way, she was no longer a threat. The fence was reinforced. The permits had been upgraded. This land was no longer vulnerable to HOA whims. It was a fortress of data and federal protection. Behind the scenes, the legal wheels were turning. Karen's case was growing teeth. Investigators found that she had signed multiple HOA authorizations herself, often bypassing required votes. She had misused emergency powers, falsified minutes, and even padded the HOA budget to hire her niece's landscaping company. All of it was now part of a larger civil case, and possibly a criminal one. The Department of Environmental Quality launched its own probe due to the herbicide contamination near the water table. Karen claimed she didn't know the orchard was on federal property, but that excuse didn't hold up. She had ignored tags, warnings, emails, and even verbal confrontations. Her own pride had become evidence. Meanwhile, I was contacted by a popular environmental podcast to do a feature on the orchard's restoration. At first, I hesitated. I didn't want to turn it into a circus. But after talking to Agent Martinez and Dr. Walsh, we agreed that public education could help prevent something like this from happening again. So I did the interview. I explained the science, the goals, and yes, even the chaos that happened. I didn't name Karen directly, but I didn't need to. Anyone who'd followed the story knew exactly who was responsible. The episode went viral. High schools requested virtual tours. One teacher told me her students were now writing essays about environmental policy and overreach. If Karen had hoped to erase me and my work from this neighborhood, she had accomplished the opposite. She had made me a symbol for resilience. The final act in Karen's unraveling came when she tried to sell her house. Real estate agents laughed her out of the room. Nobody wanted to buy into a neighborhood still reeling from federal investigations and media scrutiny. One agent told her outright, "You're the reason this zip code tanked for 6 weeks." She was furious. She claimed harassment. She threatened defamation suits again. But no one took her seriously anymore, not even her own lawyer, who quietly dropped her case after realizing she had forged documents. Yes, that came out too. The fake landscaping emergency order had a signature from a board member who was out of state during the date listed, sloppy and arrogant to the end, and as if the universe wanted one last laugh, it gave it in the form of an environmental volunteer program. The same judge overseeing her civil penalty ordered her to complete 50 hours of mandatory service under the Department of Urban Forestry. Her role? Planting native trees around public schools and municipal lots. Her vest said Weed Control Volunteer. The photo of her standing in the dirt with a shovel, red-faced and scowling, made its way online. Someone photoshopped a Corinnicus tree next to her. It was glorious. My orchard was thriving again, stronger, smarter, more protected. Karen had wanted to wipe it out, erase it, turn it into just another HOA-approved patch of grass. Instead, it became a landmark, a symbol, a federal reminder that even in the smallest plots of land, truth and science can take root, and if you mess with them, you might just end up as a cautionary tree name for generations to come. Sometimes justice grows slowly, but like the trees in my orchard, once rooted, it cannot be easily cut down. The courtroom was full, not packed with media or angry townsfolk, but with tension, the kind that made people sit up straighter and blink less. The case had finally come to trial, and Karen Merriweather was front and center, perched at the defendant's table in an ill-fitting blazer that looked borrowed and a face that was 3 shades paler than her usual self-tanned glow. She didn't have the cocky smirk anymore. Her eyes darted across the room, perhaps still hoping someone would ride in and save her from the consequences she'd spent a lifetime dodging. But no one did. The HOA board had flipped on her. The USDA had brought in expert witnesses, and the evidence was airtight. What she destroyed wasn't just property. It was federally protected infrastructure, intellectual property tied to international agricultural resilience, and public environmental safety data. It wasn't just trees. It was science, cooperation, and years of cross-institutional work. I was called to testify on the second day. I prepared, rehearsed, even gone through mock questioning with the USDA's legal counsel. Still, when I stepped into that witness box, my heart pounded like a drum. The courtroom was quiet as I walked them through the project's timeline. I spoke about the grants, the hybridization trials, the soil monitoring technology, and the international outreach plans tied to the research. I explained that one tree alone represented years of development from multiple agencies, and that losing 17 of them was like deleting several volumes of a library with a chainsaw. I kept my tone factual, calm. No emotion, no bitterness, but the weight of it hit the courtroom like a freight train. I could feel it when the judge leaned forward slightly, listening with narrowed eyes. Even Karen didn't look up. Then came the playback. Footage from the drone showed Karen walking through the orchard, issuing orders, laughing, ripping the tag from the tree and waving it like a prize. The prosecutor played her email to the HOA where she bragged about removing that eyesore for good. They showed her Facebook post that included a photo of the orchard mid-destruction with the caption, "Sometimes you have to trim the dead weight." And then they showed the real punch, the GPS data logs. Each tag had gone offline within minutes of one another, setting off a silent alarm to the USDA. It was technology Karen had mocked as nerd toys, but in court, it was devastating. Her attorney attempted a defense based on ignorance. He argued that she had no way of knowing the land wasn't under HOA jurisdiction, that the signs were small, the tags unclear, and the project itself too secretive. But that fell apart quickly. Not only were the USDA tags clearly visible and laminated, but Karen had ignored multiple physical warnings and verbal confrontations. A former HOA board member testified that Karen had dismissed concerns when someone pointed out the tags months before. She allegedly said, "Government doesn't care about trees unless they catch fire or grow money." The courtroom chuckled softly at that one, but the judge didn't. He took note. The verdict came after 3 days. Karen was found liable for the destruction of federal property, tampering with government infrastructure, and environmental endangerment through negligent use of chemicals. The fines were steep, hundreds of thousands in damages, but the real punishment wasn't monetary. The court assigned a mandatory restitution program that would take years to complete. Karen was to participate in supervised federal conservation labor, assisting reforestation projects and helping repair groundwater sampling sites damaged by suburban sprawl. Her role would be monitored, logged, and reported. Any failure to comply would result in jail time. It was poetic in its own way. She tried to cut her way to authority, and now she'd spend her days planting what she tried to destroy. The community's reaction was a mix of relief and celebration. The HOA, now under new leadership, voted to reduce its authority, restrict unilateral decision-making, and permanently exclude my property and any other federal partnership zones from future HOA oversight. A neighbor baked cookies and left them at my doorstep with a note that simply said, "Thank you for standing up to the worst parts of this place." Another sent over a drawing their daughter had made of a big smiling tree with the caption, "Jackson Treeman saves the world." It stayed pinned on my fridge. Meanwhile, the orchard bloomed. The new saplings had taken root faster than anticipated, thanks to near-perfect soil conditions and updated irrigation systems. Researchers began rotating in weekly from the universities involved, conducting surveys, collecting data, and sometimes just walking through the grove, marveling at the resilience of it all. The Corenicus Merriweather tree, intentionally planted near the edge of the property line, grew strong and tall. Its fruit was sour and oddly shaped, but the tree was resistant to nearly everything. It became the centerpiece of tours. Interns took photos next to it, laughing about its namesake. A small plaque was installed beneath it. It read, "Let the bitter remind us to protect the sweet." The orchard even began hosting student field trips. Local high schools partnered with the USDA to offer interactive tours. I walked kids through the science of the trees, explaining how innovation can come from the most unlikely of places. I never talked about Karen during the tours. There was no need. The story told itself through the trees, the tech, and the signage that read, "Federal Research Zone. Do not disturb." Karen's story, however, didn't disappear. Every few weeks, someone would spot her in town wearing a neon vest, part of her community service detail. She had been assigned to the highway cleanup crew and occasionally to a local tree nursery, where she was required to assist with basic planting. Word had it she refused to speak to anyone on the team and once got reprimanded for trying to throw away saplings she thought were ugly. But she complied, if reluctantly. Her lawyer had made it clear. One slip-up and she faced far worse than a few hours in the dirt. Time passed. The neighborhood healed. The HOA rebranded itself, softened its rules, and started actually listening to residents for the first time in years. People started decorating their porches without fearing a violation letter. Grass grew taller than regulation, and nobody died. The world didn't end because someone painted their shutters turquoise. Karen, dethroned and diminished, faded into the background. Her house stayed unsold, a physical reminder of what happens when control turns into obsession. As I walked through the orchard one evening, the sky lit orange and gold, I passed by each tree, each row of careful design and hope. This land had been targeted, mocked, and nearly ruined, but it stood again, stronger, louder in presence than ever before. A quiet revolution of roots, leaves, and data. I stopped near the Corenicus, its twisted branches reaching proudly toward the sky, and smiled. What was meant as mockery had become a monument, not to her, but to the idea that even in the face of ignorance, something beautiful can grow. And unlike HOA rules, nature doesn't need permission. It just needs patience. I picked up my binder, wiped the mud off with my sleeve, and walked back inside. My hands were shaking as I opened the secure app and pressed the red button I never thought I'd need. It sent an encrypted alert straight to my supervisor's satellite phone. I didn't even have to type anything. The system read my coordinates, accessed the drone feeds, and automatically flagged it as an active contamination or sabotage event. Outside, Karen posed for a selfie next to the pile of sawdust, beaming like she just saved the neighborhood from an alien invasion. "This will go great on the HOA newsletter," she chirped. "Jackson, try not to be such a drama queen. It's just landscaping." She had no idea that within 12 hours, Federal agents in black SUVs would be knocking on her door. No idea that every camera on my property linked directly to the USDA surveillance network had been recording her every word. And no idea that the so-called ugly trees she just massacred were part of an international seed-sharing initiative with researchers in drought-ravaged regions of Africa and Asia. She thought she was cleaning up. What she was really doing was digging her own legal grave with a chainsaw.